My husband and mother-in-law thought the house was theirs when they threatened me with divorce, but it was my inheritance, and now they can move in together. I'm Katie, a 30-year-old office worker who somehow ended up in a situation worthy of a television sitcom. I'm a hardworking woman. That's me. Married to a man who is still tied to his mommy's apron strings. That's my husband, Gary. And I have a mother-in-law who believes she's the Queen of England. I know what you're thinking. Katie, dear, why did you marry a mama's boy? Well, let me tell you, love makes you blind, deaf, and apparently stupid. When I met Gary in college, he seemed like a dream come true. Tall, handsome, and capable of forming complete sentences, which is something rare in the wild jungle of higher education. A few years later, here I am, living in a beautiful $2 million house with my husband and our daughter. A house I inherited from my father. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, buckle up, because this is where it gets interesting. You see, my dear husband and his loving mother seem to be under the impression that this beautiful, spacious house worth every cent of those $2 million was thanks to Gary's hard work and his mother's impeccable taste. But before I reveal the juicy details of how I got away with the scam of the century, let me take you on a journey through the hilarious, frustrating, and frankly absurd events that led me to finally drop the most epic truth bomb. I was an excited college student full of expectations when I met Gary. Armed with nothing but a dream, a stack of textbooks, and an unhealthy addiction to cafeteria coffee, Gary walked into my life like a knight in shining armor. If that armor were made of football jerseys and beer cans. Our eyes met in a crowded lecture hall, and it was love at first sight. Okay, fine, it wasn't that romantic. He spilled his energy drink all over my notes, and I may have said a few words that would make a sailor blush. But hey, nothing says true love like ruined notes and sticky fingers. From that moment on, we were inseparable. The first sign of Gary's peculiar relationship with his mother came on our third date. Picture the scene. Candlelight dinner, soft music, the two of us gazing lovingly into each other's eyes. Suddenly, Gary's phone rings. He ignores it, like any normal person on a date would. Or not. Our Gary practically lunges across the table to answer it. "Hi, Mom," he says with the enthusiasm of a Labrador seeing its owner after 5 minutes apart. What followed was a 15-minute conversation about whether he remembered to pack his lucky underwear for exam week. I wish I were joking. I really do. Did I run for the hills like any woman with self-respect would? No. I stayed there, sipping my lukewarm cheap wine, thinking, how sweet, he loves his mom. Pass Katie. If I could go back in time and slap some sense into you, I would. Hard. Years pass, and suddenly we're engaged. How did that happen, you ask? Well, let's just say it involved a hidden ring, a poorly executed proposal speech that mentioned his mother no fewer than 5 times, and me, in my infinite wisdom, saying yes. Wedding planning was an experience. And by experience, I mean a nightmare sprinkled with passive-aggressive comments from my future mother-in-law. This, my friends, is where Carol really began to shine. Every decision, from the color of the napkins to the flavor of the cake, had to be approved by Carol. God forbid we chose lilac for the bridesmaids' dresses. Carol nearly had an aneurysm over that. And Gary? He was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Every time I tried to get his opinion, he would shrug and say, "Whatever you and Mom think is best, honey." I should have known then that I wasn't just marrying Gary. I was entering a polygamous relationship with him and his mother. But the real fun began when we started house hunting. Most couples look for a house together. Maybe they bring a real estate agent or a trusted friend for a second opinion. Not us. That would have been far too normal. We brought Carol. The final blow came when we found a house that everyone approved of. And by everyone, I mean Carol gave her blessing, and I was too exhausted to keep arguing. While we were standing in the living room, Carol turned to Gary with tears in her eyes and said, "Oh, sweetheart, I can already see our family gathered here on Christmas morning." Our family, not your family. Our. I was standing right there, and somehow I had already been erased from the picture. Gary didn't correct her. He just nodded, probably imagining himself in barefoot pajamas opening presents while his beloved mommy watched with sparkling eyes. At this point, you're probably wondering why I didn't run. Trust me, I've asked myself that question approximately 37,042 times since then. But love, sleep deprivation from endless house visits, and the sunk cost fallacy are a dangerous combination. So, Against all better judgment, and probably several laws of nature, we got married. The wedding was, well, let's just say if you look up the word circus in the dictionary, you'd find a picture of our wedding party. Carol wore white. Yes, you read that right. White. To her son's wedding. When I pointed it out to Gary, he just shrugged and said, Mom says it's more of an off-white. Off-white, my ass. It was whiter than a polar bear in a snowstorm. But we made it through. We said our vows, cut the cake, and embarked on our new life together. And by together, I mean with Carol's constant presence lurking in the background. You'd think that once married and settled into our new house, the one Carol chose, remember, things would calm down. No, married life with Gary was like running a three-legged race, except the third leg belonged to Carol, and she was always trying to trip me. She was everywhere. If she wasn't physically present, she was there in spirit, living rent-free in Gary's head and dictating every aspect of our lives. Want to buy a new couch? Better check with Carol first. Thinking about trying a new recipe for dinner? No, Gary only likes food the way his mother makes it. Want to paint the guest room? Slow down, young lady. Carol might not like that color combination. And before I knew it, I was pregnant. Now, most women enjoy their pregnancies. They have baby showers, decorate nurseries, and bask in the glow of impending motherhood. I enjoyed Carol's constant commentary on everything I ate, drank, or did. Apparently, when you're carrying precious little Gary Jr., you're no longer allowed to make decisions for yourself. Oh, Katie, should you really be drinking coffee? I never touched that stuff when I was pregnant with Gary. Well, that explains a lot. Katie dear, are you sure you want to paint the nursery that color? Studies show it could affect the baby's cognitive development. Gary seemed like he had sampled that paint too, because he nodded along with everything his mother said. I swear, if Carol had told him that standing on his head and singing, I'm a little teapot, would guarantee a healthy baby, he would have been upside down singing nursery rhymes before you could say umbilical cord. The day I went into labor was an experience. I was huffing and puffing, trying not to curse all men on the planet. And guess who walked into the delivery room? Carol. Gary had called her before calling the hospital. I'm not joking. His first instinct when his wife went into labor was to call his mommy. I'd say I was surprised, but at that point I was too busy trying to give birth to Care. There I was, bringing a new life into the world, my husband on one side looking like he might faint at any moment, and my mother-in-law on the other side offering pearls of wisdom like, now Katie, when I gave birth to Gary, I didn't make nearly that much noise. Having a baby only gave Carol more ammunition. Now I wasn't just a bad wife. I was a bad mother. Every decision I made was wrong. I didn't feed the baby correctly. I didn't change her properly. I didn't sing the right songs. It was an endless avalanche of criticism, all delivered with that sugary smile that made me fantasize about pushing her into a barrel of fast-drying cement. Gary was thrilled. He had his mommy and his daughter under the same roof. The fact that his wife was slowly losing her sanity seemed to completely escape him. It was around this time that I realized I needed to make a change. Not for my sake. No, I was already too far gone, but for my daughter. I refused to raise a girl who thought it was normal for her father to consult his mother on every decision. I refused to let her grow up believing her worth depended on how well she met her grandmother's impossible standards. So I did what any sensible woman would do. I changed jobs. Yes, you read that right. I quit my well-paid, stable job with irregular hours for a lower-paying position that gave me more time at home. I was determined to be there for my daughter in a way Gary never would be. Of course, Carol had plenty to say about that decision. Oh, Kat, are you sure that's a good idea? How are you going to maintain Gary's lifestyle on that salary? As if Gary's lifestyle of playing video games and consulting his mommy about which socks to wear required a six-figure income. But I stood my ground. For the first time since meeting Gary, I made a decision without considering what he or Carol might think. But don't worry, this isn't the end of the story. Oh no, we're just getting started. Remember that $2 million house I mentioned? That's where things really start to get interesting. But more on that later. For now, I need a strong drink. And possibly a lobotomy to erase the image of Carol in her off-white wedding dress. Update 1. Last time I left you with the birth of my daughter and my brilliant decision to change jobs. Now let's fast forward a bit to when things really started heating up. There we were, a happy family of 3, or 4, if you count Carol, which Gary apparently always did. Our daughter was growing faster than Gary's pile of dirty laundry, and we were starting to feel a little cramped in our current place. You know, the house Carol had so generously chosen for us newlyweds. One fine morning, over a breakfast of burnt toast, my dear husband said something that nearly made me choke on my charcoal-flavored crust. "Sweetheart," he said with all the subtlety of a bull in a china shop, "I've been thinking. Mom is getting older, and I'm worried about her future. What if we look for a place where we can all live together?" Now, I pride myself on being a reasonable person. I had endured Carol's constant interference, Gary's inability to make a single decision without consulting the mothership. But this was too much. I tried to reason with him. I pointed out that Carol had aged like a fine wine full of preservatives and would probably outlive all of us. I reminded him that we valued our space. But no, Gary was determined. He had an entire speech prepared about family values and taking care of our elders. I'm fairly sure Carol had written it for him and made him practice it in front of a mirror. I was faced with a choice. Accept living with the woman who had made it her life's mission to criticize every aspect of my existence, or be the evil daughter-in-law who denied sweet Carol the joy of watching her granddaughter grow up. But your friend Katie is not the type to give up without a fight. So I put on my big girl pants and proposed a compromise. We would look for a house, sure, but it would be close to Carol's current home, not in it. Close enough for frequent visits, but far enough away that I could pretend the doorbell was broken when I needed a break from reality. Surprisingly, Gary agreed. I suspect he was just relieved that I hadn't immediately filed for divorce or had him committed to a psychiatric ward for even suggesting we live with his mother. Now, remember how I mentioned earlier that I inherited a house from my father? Well, this is where things get interesting. You see, I hadn't told Gary about this little inheritance. Why, you ask? Well, partly because I knew that the moment Carol found out, she would be redecorating the place in her mind. But mostly because, I guess, I wanted something that was just mine. So I suggested we look for houses in the area where, coincidentally, the property I had inherited was located. Gary didn't suspect a thing. He was too busy making sure every house we saw had a suitable room for his mother's extended stays. Eventually, we settled on a house. And when I say we settled, I mean I managed to convince Gary and Carol that the house I had inherited was on the market and was perfect for us. Because, of course, having a bigger house didn't deter Carol. It just gave her more space to spread her particular brand of madness. She started visiting all the time. At first, it was once a week, then twice, then every other day. Soon, I was looking for excuses to work late just to avoid coming home and finding her reorganizing my cabinets or giving me lessons on the proper way to fold fitted sheets. Gary was thrilled. He had his mommy close by, cooking his favorite meals and generally treating him like the 12-year-old boy who still needed his mom to cut the crusts off his sandwiches. About 3 months after we moved in, I came home one day to find that Carol had let herself in and was in the middle of repainting our living room. "Oh, Katie, you're home," she said cheerfully, as if letting yourself into someone else's house and redecorating it were perfectly normal. "I hope you don't mind, but that almond color was so boring. I thought a lovely mauve would bring more life to the room. Mommy, look what Grandma gave me." And there, in my daughter's arms, was the ugliest, frilliest dress I had ever seen. As I looked at my daughter beaming, my mauve walls, and Carol's satisfied face, I realized that something had to change. And since throwing your mother-in-law out a window is generally frowned upon by the law, I knew the one who had to change was me. It all started with a phone call from my mom. Now, let me take a moment to appreciate my mother. Compared to Carol, she's a saint. She calls me once a week, remembers my birthday without Facebook reminding her, and has never once implied that her way of loading the dishwasher is superior to mine. But this call was different. Her health, and my dad's, had been declining for a while, and things had taken a turn for the worse. They were really struggling to take care of themselves. They genuinely needed help. I did what any good daughter would do. I adjusted my work schedule, kissed my daughter, and prepared to split my time between my home and my parents' house. Gary's response was exactly what you'd expect. He muttered something about how hard it would be for him to manage without me, as if he were the one balancing a job, a child, and 2 sick parents. He even had the nerve to suggest that maybe Carol could come stay with us full-time to help. But I didn't have time for that conversation. I had parents to care for, a daughter to raise, and a job to keep. So I did what women have done since the beginning of time. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and carried on. What I didn't expect was Carol's reaction to my new schedule. You'd think she'd be delighted. After all, I was out of the house more often, giving her free rein to redecorate as she pleased and spoil her precious boy. But no, to her, the fact that I was prioritizing my own parents meant that I was somehow neglecting my duties as a wife and mother. I wasn't spending enough time with my daughter. The house was messy. Gary was eating too much takeout. It all came to a head one night when I came home late from my parents' place, exhausted and emotionally drained, and found Carol in my kitchen, her lips pursed in disapproval. "Katie," she said in that sugary voice that made me want to commit serious crimes, "I think we need to talk about your priorities." And that, dear Reddit, is where I'll leave you for now. Because what happened next? Well, that's a story of its own. Update 2. I was standing in my kitchen, so tired I could barely see clearly. I had spent the day bouncing between work calls, changing my dad's for line, and trying to convince my mom that she needed to eat something other than stale crackers and sadness. And now, here was Carol, staring at me and accusing me. What came out of my mouth was a wave of frustration, rage, and enough swear words to invent new curses. It was like a dam had broken, and years of bottled-up resentment came flooding out. Carol did not take it well. Her face went through more colors than a chameleon in a bag of candy. Then Gary walked in. Was he ready to defend my honor and put his mother in her place? Of course not. Gary took one look at the scene, his wife red with fury and possibly foaming at the mouth, and his precious mommy looking like she was about to faint onto the nearest couch. And guess what he did? He took her side. In the great showdown between his wife and his mother, Gary chose his mom. He launched into a speech about respect, family values, and how I was destroying this family with my selfish behavior. But Gary wasn't done. Oh no, he saved the best for last. In a move I'm sure he thought was his winning card, he dropped this gem. If you ever wanted a divorce, you and our daughter wouldn't be able to manage on your own. You understand that, right? Oh, my sweet Gary. You just screwed up. Monumentally. I burst out laughing. Gary and Carol stared at me like I had finally lost my mind. And maybe I had, but in losing it, I also found something. My spine. Once I could breathe again, I straightened up. Honey, who said I'd be the one who couldn't manage? The confusion on their faces was priceless. You could practically see the hamster wheels spinning in their heads as they tried to process what I had just said. And that's when I dropped the biggest truth bomb of all. I told them everything. About the house. About how it wasn't just any house, but a $2 million property I had inherited from my father. About how every mortgage payment, every property tax bill, and every leaky faucet repair had been paid with my money. Gary's face went from confusion to disbelief, and then to something that looked suspiciously like fear. Carol, on the other hand, went from shock to indignation, and then settled into a kind of calculating interest that sent chills down my spine. But I wasn't done. I was on a roll, and nothing short of divine intervention was going to shut me up. I explained everything. How I had been biting my tongue for years, enduring Carol's interference and Gary's complete lack of backbone. How I had changed jobs, sacrificed my career, and bent over backward to accommodate their every whim. And for what? To be treated like a glorified maid in my own home? I made it very clear that things were going to change. No more surprise visits from Carol. No more redecorating without my permission. No more treating me like a charity case who should be grateful for whatever crumbs of affection they decided to toss my way. And to Gary, I made it clear that he had a decision to make. He could start behaving like a husband and a father, or he could pack his bags and go live with his beloved mommy. Because I was done. Done. Carol, predictably, burst into crocodile tears. She screamed that she had only ever wanted what was best for the family, that she couldn't believe I had deceived them, that I could be so cruel to poor, sweet Gary. Gary, for his part, looked like he had just been hit by a truck. He babbled, stammered, and even tried to argue that surely, as my husband, he had some right to the house. I did what any sensible woman would do in my situation. I called a lawyer. The kind of lawyer that makes other lawyers wake up in the middle of the night sweating. Because if Gary thought he was going to intimidate me with divorce threats, he was in for a surprise. My lawyer assured me that not only was the house completely mine, but that if Gary wanted to push for a divorce, he'd be lucky to walk away with anything more than the clothes on his back. Of course, this is real life and not a movie. so things didn't magically resolve themselves overnight. Gary, in a surprising display of survival instinct, seemed to realize just how badly he had messed up. He started talking about couples therapy, about fixing things, about how he loved me and our daughter. As for Carol, well, let's just say she didn't take her new persona non grata status very well. She tried everything: emotional blackmail, love bombing, even a half-hearted attempt at an apology. But I stood firm. My house, my rules. And my rules said, no more Carol. I realized that by standing up for myself, by refusing to be a doormat one more time, I was teaching my daughter the most valuable lesson of all, that she deserves respect, that she doesn't have to tolerate abuse from anyone, not even family. Especially family. Now, I know you're dying to know what happened next. Well, my curious friends, that's a story for another day. For now, let's just say that life is interesting. Challenging, yes, but also freeing in a way I never thought possible. I'm rediscovering who I am without Gary's expectations and Carol's constant criticism weighing on me. So if you're out there dealing with your own Gary or Carol, remember this: you're worth more than you think. You deserve more than you believe. And sometimes, the most liberating thing you can do is stand up and say, no more. Edit. Holy hell, this blew up overnight. I can't believe how many of you are so invested in my drama. Your comments and messages have me alternating between laughing out loud and ugly crying into my glass of wine. Thank you all for the support, the advice, and the truly creative suggestions about what I should do with Carol's house key. No, I will not glue it inside a fish and mail it to her, although the temptation is strong. To answer some common questions, yes, I'm keeping the house. It's legally mine, completely and unquestionably, and no tantrum from man-child Gary is going to change that. No, I haven't kicked Gary out yet. We're in a weird kind of limbo where he's trying to convince me he can change, and I'm trying to decide whether I even want him to. Carol is banned from the house for now. I've informed her that if she shows up again uninvited, I won't hesitate to call the police. The chronic bitch face she made was epic, trust me. To the many, many people who asked for Carol's number because she sounds hot, please seek help. Seriously. Yes, I've changed the locks and the security code. For those asking about my daughter, she's fine. Kids are resilient, and I'm making sure she knows none of this is her fault. In fact, she seems happier since Carol's visit stopped. What a surprise. And finally, to the person who suggested I write a book, don't tempt me. 50 Shades of Mauve. The story of a mother-in-law has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Thanks again, Reddit. Your support means more than you can imagine. I'll update when I can, but for now, I have a life to live and a lot of mauve to paint over. Update 3. I'm back, because I know how much you've all been waiting for the conclusion of this story and of the wonderful marriage I had. If you can hear the sarcasm. I bet you wanted to know whether Gary stayed with me or with his beloved mommy. Well, let me tell you, he never really had a choice. Though, to be honest, if he had, he probably would have chosen his mother anyway. Luckily, shortly after my last update, the divorce papers were ready to be served. Gary's face when he received them was exactly as entertaining as you'd imagine. A mix of surprise, concern, and confusion, like he couldn't believe what was happening. He acted as if the divorce was the strangest thing in the world, as if he hadn't seen it coming. But honestly, what's really strange is that I didn't file for divorce much earlier. In fact, what's strange is that I married him in the first place, or that I didn't run the first time he showed clear signs of being a mama's boy. Along with the divorce papers came, as expected, an eviction notice. I wasn't going to let him keep living in my house a single day longer than necessary. The good news for him was that he didn't have to move very far. His new, and old, address was exactly where everyone expected, his mother's house. Of course, I made that comment thinking it would be good news for him. I mean, what could be better than living with his beloved mother? Strangely enough, he didn't find it funny. Why? No idea. I thought he'd enjoy it, with all that emotional incest. I mean, it's only emotional, right? Fortunately, it didn't take him long to leave. It only took a few days for him to pack up and move out, probably because he already had some clothes at his mother's house. The reason for that is something I neither want to know nor care about. Once he was gone, everything moved forward as it should. The divorce process took a few months, as these things usually do, but it was finally completed. I kept the house, because it was never marital property. It was an inheritance from my father. And for those asking, yes, It is possible to inherit something even if the person is still alive. As for the rest of our belongings, we divided them fairly. But the best part of all is that Gary now has to pay child support. This was a huge relief, because I was starting to consider looking for a better-paying job to support my daughter and myself now that he was no longer in the picture. Thanks to the child support, however, we can cover the difference without too much worry. Plus, now that his mother can no longer walk into this house or interfere in our lives, there are significant savings. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you get rid of an emotional parasite. As expected, Carol tried to come back. She wanted to see her granddaughter, but I was very clear. If she wants to see her, she can do it during the time she spends with her father. I made it clear that there is no place for her in this house. And yes, maybe I was a little harsh, but I told her that dangerous animals are not allowed here. The look on her face when I said that was almost as good as the look on Gary's face when he received the divorce papers. As for custody of our daughter, we reached an agreement. She stays with me during the week and with her father on the weekends. Although, realistically, she spends most of that time with her grandmother, since Gary is still living with Carol and hasn't made any attempt to move out, even though several months have passed since he left my house. As for everything else, I have to say that things are much better now. Once you get rid of what's poisoning your life, everything starts to improve. It's like I had been carrying a backpack full of rocks for years, and once I finally dropped it, everything suddenly became easier. I no longer have to walk on eggshells in my own home or live under the constant shadow of Carol's criticism. My daughter is calmer, and although it may be hard for her to have divorced parents, I think she feels the difference too, without her grandmother's constant interference in our space. Now the house finally feels like my home. And in case you're wondering, yes, I finally got rid of every trace of mauve in the house. That paint was the first thing to go once Gary left. Freedom has a color, and I can assure you, it's not mauve.